Okay, this is David Zierler, Director of the Caltech Heritage Project. It's Tuesday, June 11th, 2024. It's my great pleasure to be back once again with Professor Michael Gazzaniga. Mike, as always, it's great to be with you. Thanks again for joining.
Great. It's great to be here too.
All right, Mike, we're going to pick up right in 2006 when you joined the faculty at UC Santa Barbara. First question, the Sage Center for the Study of the Mind. Were you the founding director or does this precede your tenure?
I guess I was the founding director. It was a gift that was simultaneously being acquired just as I was being hired. And there was a mutual facilitation that I could do it if I took the job and so forth and so on, that kind of thing. But it would have happened, I think, regardless. But as it turned out, I was coming into this wonderful opportunity, and they said, "Well, you'll run the Sage Center as well."
What is the word sage? What does it mean here? Who is or was sage?
Yeah, yeah, it's a great name, but it actually refers to the Sage Publishing Company,
Oh, I see.
and they were the benefactors, and the owners, the couple owner of Sage was Sarah and George. So they contracted it to Sage, and that's how they got their name. And they've had great success, as you know, as an academic publishing house. And Sarah, the surviving spouse in that for a number of years, is just an enormously important philanthropist and especially to UCSB and the whole Santa Barbara community.
Now, how much leeway did you have for putting your own imprint on the Sage Center's mission? Was that sort of pre-formed, or did you have opportunity to make it what you wanted?
You know, what I've discovered when you're in one of these situations where you're leading an academic group, uh, if if there aren't personal animosities between anybody for some reason that's unimportant to anything, people pretty much say, okay, go ahead, take the lead, and when you screw up, we'll tell you. And therefore, it cuts down on a lot of back and forth and endless meetings about details that don't amount to anything in the end. And so I can say both when I was at Davis, getting their neuroscience center off the ground, and here I've had that wonderful relationship with the faculty. And the same is true here at Santa Barbara. Santa Barbara is a prone. It's almost definitional self is that they are like to be interdisciplinary and call upon many different departments to come together and coherent projects. And so there's not a sense of foreignness to that idea. So it was easy to jump in and just try to do it. Now, to do it is hard work. It is everybody wants to retract back to their specialty. It's just what we do. We know how to do this. We don't know how to do that. But we know we got to kind of start doing that because that's where the cutting edge is, right? And so to pull it off, you need to not only bring in the right speakers, have the right sort of social setting at the institution, but then there's a lot of social activity that's got to go with it, with getting people together. And a big part of our Sage Center here that's actually become quite known is when we bring a guest in, not only are the meetings with the faculty and the students in the usual range, but we always arrange a private dinner party where the game of the party was at the dinner table after served food and so forth. There would be the hot question. There would be the time to put the speaker on the hot seat. What do you mean when you say X, Y, and Z? How can that possibly be true, kind of thing? And it's all done in high positive spirit, but it is also done. It is what's really going on with this topic and that kind of question. And that's turned out to be kind of the best part of it because people really will talk in that kind of setting. And We have our local faculty who are the best in the area, whoever the speaker is, and it has become an aspect of academic interaction, and I'm told time and time again was really kind of unique and um, very positive, very constructive. So that's a long-winded way of saying that just to set up a program and by design and say you want to do stuff is, yeah, that's kind of the simple part. Uh, the hard part is to actually get it to go. I can tell you about one dinner. I won't mention who the people are because I wouldn't want to embarrass them. But one of these dinners, it turned out that two of our speakers were in town at the same time. So we combined the dinner. Both of them were there. And one was a major philosopher and one was a major neuroscientist. And as we were going to dinner, we couldn't wait to get to the entree. I mean, these guys wanted to talk. And one of them leans over across the table to the other and says, "Now, so you don't actually believe that bullshit you're telling us, right?" and everybody goes, "Whoa!" and it cracks up laughing. But the question was serious, and then this intricate conversation ensued that kind of, it broke the ice. That's the kind of question that was on everybody's mind. The neuroscientist was proposing a very complex thing. Do you really think that's how it works? And so forth and so on. But it's so hard to get those kinds of conversations going and to get real interdisciplinary activity. And it's just hard work. It shouldn't be in any other category. It's not, going out and having a few beers with your friends. That's not it. This is what we do here, and there's going to be a very intense conversation at this point in the dinner as to what is the field doing and what are we doing, and I think that's. Well,
Mike, is your sense, was there an interdisciplinary research culture centering around the mind prior to the Sage Center, or the Sage Center really corralled all of those siloed interests?
Yeah, no, not at this campus anyway. And so that was why it was such an important thing to do on this campus. This is the UC Santa Barbara is reeking with talent from all kinds of biological, physical sciences. It's a very scientific campus actually, and but we from the start we involved lots of biologists, physicists, economists. While the Sage Center is based out of the psychology department, that's only for purposes of accounting from the dean. It's really a dean's program, and then he has to place it somewhere to manage it because he can't manage this out of the dean's office. But the notion behind it is to try to bring together departments from a large canvas.
What was some of the pleasant surprises for you, given how diverse all of the academic affiliations connected with the Sage Center were? Right, it wasn't just biology and physics; it was humanities, it was economics, it was philosophy. What were some of the most surprising disciplines to you that had interesting things to say about the mind?
Well, you always will get, when you go into the humanities, you will always get people interested in the idea of what do we know about the mind. Obviously, they're humanists. They want to know what is this thing and how do we think about it and what's unique about it. And then the skill is to find ones that have actually thought about it and have some understanding of scientific process, vocabulary, and the rest. And we had such people here on campus. And again, the work part of it. Who are these people? We don't want to have to go rediscover everybody. So there's knowledge existing about people who have that kind of aspect of their intellectual life. So So we picked up on those people, and then it was quite surprising the number of physicists that wanted it. Santa Barbara is well known for its physics efforts. It's got 6 Nobel laureates and all the rest of it, and they were they were totally engaged and helped us with our effort, even though they have quite a major effort on their own on a broad base of, at the Kavli Institute, a broad base of questions. But they were very helpful, and of course the biology department was all in. And so, and then I brought in the economics department, and recently we've been able to uh, be more active with the philosophy department. So there's lots of people involved, and what do? We try to have a cross section of speakers. We had 2 programs initially where people came and stayed for 2 or 3 weeks, and then we had the shorter version where they came for 2 or 3 days. And you have to plan these things in advance because of the time. Everybody's busy, and all the rest of it that goes with it. We for one of the programs, we finally rented an apartment in town, and that became the Sage apartment, and people could use it at will. And sometimes people called up and said, I'd like to come out for 2 or 3 days, and they would come on their own dime, as it were, and we'd let them stay in the apartment. So all those little factors that just encourage, being together and thinking about the problems. The well-known philosopher Dan Dennett was a big friend of the center, and he came several times. It would just be part of the culture here. And people like Steve Pinker and Rebecca Goldstein and the generalists just saw what it could do and would do, and were very supportive. Yeah.
What impact did this have on your own research, being in such an interdisciplinary environment?
Yeah, so when I took the job, I was 66 years old. So I'd, for 50 years, been running labs and postdocs and grad students and machines and the whole the whole 9 yards. And what you don't think of as you age into your 60s is that to take on a new student in your early 60s is kind of a dangerous game, because you don't know how long you're going to be having an active lab. A lab is a very complex thing, up and down in age group and commitments to people that you may go beyond your plan to be at the university. So this opportunity hit me at a time when I was kind of winding down my lab, which was fine, but I wanted to wind up these intellectual programs and have the fun of precipitating idea groups and all the rest of it, which we did and have done. And so it becomes a different kind of thing you do, for sure. And I wrote a number of books during this period too, which allows you time for that. So yeah, it's a different game. And but I want to emphasize I could read you off. We've had 70, 80 people through here in the last few years. Each one of them are really tops in their field, and a whole experience. So the management of all that and so forth, it's really great. But again, I have to emphasize that it's work to get interdisciplinary things to work. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It doesn't just happen. I suppose ultimately in the room where, as they say, in the room where it happens, the penny drops and people say, wait a minute, that person really has an idea there that I should be applying to my field. And there's that wonderful event that occurs where somebody's perspective actually changes. We just had one of those experiences last year, and it was just, it makes it all worthwhile when you have successfully put together into the same space people who didn't think the same way, and come out saying, I've been missing something here, and so forth. So, and the thing that came out of recently that I put together just as I was retiring this past year, a spinoff, as it were, from Sage was something we called the Foundations Institute, and it's the goal there is really to put into a small group of scientists interacting 5, 6 people, an idea that's examining one of the current dogmas in a field, realizing that scientists get caught in these stories, and the stories are pushed hard, and they're uh, uh, established through graduate students and postdocs and fundings, and pretty soon the idea gets set, and it's hard to have a variation on the idea because of all the natural forces of just how the science bureaucracy works. And we're all aware of this. We don't like to think about it. We all, but so this idea was, well, come on, we're all grown-ups here. Let's take some dogmas and get in a room where there are no rules, and everybody has frank discussions about what do we really mean by this? How could this, and then bring it, and quite frequently, you might think one of the king dogma makers of it, whatever the topic is the person who has the greatest doubts about it. But it's not good business to be out saying that. And so you want to be in a room where there's a high respect of mutual value between people, and they have a full discussion about it and challenge it. And we had one of these about 6 years ago on the importance of the synapse in memory storage in the brain. Fundamental question. Everybody been studying it for years. And somebody was challenging that that's the way we should be thinking about it. And everybody, this meeting goes usually for two days, a couple days, maybe 2.5. And everybody said it was the best meeting they've ever been to, because there was just okay, we're going to really talk about this. We're not doing a slide salad kind of thing where everybody just presents slides and tells their story and goes home. No. We're starting here. Everybody's done their, everybody knows everybody's work here. Let's just start talking about the question and having a real full discussion about it. And again, it takes work to get it going. You gotta make sure that you haven't stumbled into inviting someone who's just a naysayer. There are people like that in the business, of course, and there are people you want to have a point of view, have a strong point of view, but they're open-minded and smart and not afraid of discussing an idea. And so all that takes work, judgment, and when it works, it's great. Sometimes, that doesn't work so great. But
if I can broaden the question out, what has been the impact on split brain research generally from having this interdisciplinary perspective?
Well, I guess for me, by having this broad-based program, we are quick to invite people who have ideas on how the brain enables conscious experience. So we had over the years a large range of people, and this goes all the way from people with computer science background and network science kind of backgrounds, into neurologists who see variations of things in the clinic that are interesting, into molecular and cellular people. And so what you learn is you learn how those people are looking at the problem. And for me, the takeaway is how I have more work to do on communicating the take-home lessons of split brain research. And so that's, I mentioned this back earlier. I'm I'm starting a book where I try to do that,
Wow.
and I won't tell you what it is.
Okay. Mike, the other significant affiliation I wanted to talk to you about when you got to UC Santa Barbara, MacArthur Foundation's research network on law and neuroscience. Did that
Yes.
also start at this same time, or is there a prehistory there?
So the MacArthur Law and Neuroscience Project popped into to us around 2007. And we got here from back in my Dartmouth days. We got out here about 2006, and it came kind of in for us out of the blue. But I was recently asked to talk about that, the history of that, and I think what happened was that my 6 year experience on being on the President's Bioethics Council, people said, well, okay, this guy can work with a larger group of people, a committee, uh, looking at bioethical questions. And because he can do that, maybe he could help. I'm thinking this is how the MacArthur uh, gang was thinking about it. MacArthur gang wanted to start a project on neuroscience and the law. And that came out of their solicitation of ideas from all their fellows. And one of the people that answered their call and wrote a proposal was the neuroscientist from Stanford, Robert Sapolsky. And he said, there's a lot going on in neuroscience that may address how we think of punishment and what is a proper punishment in this modern age, when in general, the impact of neuroscience on how law is going to happen. Well, so MacArthur bought that idea from Sapolsky, and then they started looking around for how they would do it, how they would start one of their networks, and so they pulled together. They had a proposal from this is getting way down into the weeds,
That's okay.
but they had someone that was thinking about them for them, and how they found, and then they held a couple little meetings that I happened to be invited to, and so I remember it was in the New York meeting. I went to get up during the meeting, go to the bathroom, and I came back, and the head of the committee said, "Well, guess what?" I said, "What?" He says to me, "You're the director of the new Neuroscience and Law Project." When I go out of the room, they needed somebody to run it, so I took it on because it's a fascinating topic, right? And so we did that for 3 or 4 years, looking at all aspects of the question. Could you use neuroscience to make better predictions of parole? Could you use neuroscience to help the judgments justices have to get in mitigation of a crime? Could you use neuroscience as evidence that the person was responsible or wasn't responsible for it? A host of questions, right? And so the task was to bring together lawyers, neuroscientists, and judges to start thinking about this. And as I said, we did. The thing that was so interesting in the first year or two of it was that the professional fields really had no idea how the other field worked. Uh, Neuroscientists didn't really know how the legal system worked, and the law professors and the litigators and the justices really didn't know how neuroscience worked. And we didn't know how the judicial part of the system worked, namely that when it actually comes to meting out justice and punishment, it's up to the judge. That's who does it. And it turned out, to my lights, they became kind of the most fascinating part of the story for me, because that's where where the rubber's going to hit the road, where you can make an argument that you have evidence that should mitigate the set punishment of something for somebody who did something, and that's really tough, hard work to do all that. So anyway, we all finally learned how the other play their game, what their professional responsibility was, how the actual justice system works, as opposed to how we think it works from Perry Mason and all the rest of it. That became a lot of self knowledge, self learning there, and then it kind of changed into that particular project changed into really trying to establish a formality for how lawyers were going to deal with neuroscience. And the project was passed on to a lawyer, Owen Jones from Vanderbilt, and he took over running it at that point. And it was about 2010, 11, somewhere back in there. And then it kind of changes its goal to really kind of being specific for how this whole new science was going to be used in the courtroom, and they put out a couple of publications on it and so forth. Yeah.
Does this center suggest a new interest in the law in neuroscience?
Well, it turns out how science was used in the courts was very interesting. If you hadn't thought about it before, you found out how interesting it was. Up until the 1950s, 1960s, what was called science was a psychoanalytic evaluation of somebody. And those psychiatrists, psychoanalysts were brought into the court as the expert, and they would say, and that was the hard science, right? It wasn't all of a sudden that transformed into some guy with a brain imaging machine is telling you about spots in the brain and what the implications of that is. That's just a totally different game. And by that time, of course, psychoanalysis and that kind of thing was defending itself as whether it really was a science or something else. And so there had always been interested in trying to figure out the cause, right, of crime. And it used to be psychiatry held reign there. And then now it's just a different story. But there's serious arguments whether neuroscience is too soon. Mm-hmm. And I'm kind of side with that there's too many ways you can explain yourself around a neuroscience finding to make it definitive at this point. And so I think neuroscience is going to get there. I think it's going to be hugely important, but I think it's still a number of years away.
Despite it being too soon, do we see practical impacts on a neuroscientific perspective on legal matters, in courtroom procedure, in sentencing, in probation? What are those impacts?
Right. You mentioned all the things that it will have an impact in, I think, someday. But we aren't there today. I mean, to make a simple point, one of the favorite sort of defenses is if someone says engage in violent behavior, and then it turns out they have left frontal lobe damage for whatever reasons. And then the story starts, well, people with left frontal lobe lesions can become disinhibited and carry out a violent act. And that's all true. The problem is that the frequency of violence in a normal population is about 4%. And if you have a left frontal lobe lesion, it certainly increases it. Maybe people argue about maybe it goes up to 11, 15%. But that's 85% of people with lesions there don't engage in violent behavior. So you get into the realization that all findings are going to be statistical probabilities and all the rest of it. And so is there room in the diagnosis to say, yeah, that happens sometime, but it didn't happen in my case here, and so forth, right? So those kinds of issues, people think neuroscience is going to come in, and well, this is it. Here's the story, period, and a story. No, it's not there yet for that.
And so just to clarify, this is to say that we don't see these impacts yet. We don't see this already affecting all kinds of legal issues.
No, not yet. In my opinion, I mean, you might get a different answer from somebody, but I don't see it that way.
What would be your response? I can imagine a critic saying that, once we factor in all of these issues, ultimately it's going to lead to more leniency because we're coming up with biological excuses for illegal behavior.
Yeah. Yeah, and or even a more. Let me give you a very concrete response in one of our studies, study conversations. Let's say between your psychologists and your neuroscientists and other people testifying on whether somebody should get a parole, will they recidivate, right? Let's say you get all the way up to 95% probability that if you let this guy go, he's going to go back to crime, right? The judge evaluating the hope for justice and return to normalcy in this person's life might say, yeah, but there's a 5% chance that they may live the good life. And that, an exaggerated case, of course, but that's what they're weighing all the time. That of course we understand punishment, of course we're using this for the deterrence and responsibility, but there's this other function a court is supposed to have, which is balancing the probability that we may get this person back on track again. So it's going to be and by the way, no one's near that 95% thing yet, but the idea is there, and it's a real part of judicial decision making.
Now, is the MacArthur Foundation still supporting this program, or has it ended?
I think it's ended. Yeah.
And has it ended more or less on the basis that it's too soon? Is that sort of the conclusion of the effort, that this is something perhaps to pick up at a later time?
I think that view is kind of the view of many of the people who worked on the problem and others who didn't work on the problem but read about it. I think may think it's too soon. However, let me put a caveat on it. The way foundations work is they kick things off the ground, and then if they click in terms of societal need, other agencies come in and underwrite their use. And so the foundation will then move on to another problem and try to kick that one off the ground. So that foundations aren't in the business of sustaining one of their efforts. They're interested in developing the argument, the need, make the society aware of it, and then go do another one. Which, as those of us doing these things, wait a minute, come on, we just did all this work. But that's how that's just how it works.
To go back to this concept of, maybe there's a permissiveness that might occur as a result of thinking about neuroscience. One article you wrote, "My brain made me do it." I mean, it just begs the fun counter to that. What else would make you do it if not your brain?
Yeah, right. Right. Well, yeah. I from that point of view, nothing. Yeah. But my view on all this is, so then you get into these very complicated questions of free will and responsibility and so forth. And the reductionists came in and said, look, we know that the brain is what's ultimately responsible for everything that we're experiencing. So if you did a bad act, it's just your, faulty brain and blah, blah, blah. And my answer to that is no, that's not fair. That's not right. How you have to think about it is you want an automatic brain. When I want to point to my nose. I want my hand to go to my nose. I don't want it to go flying off in some other direction. So I want this thing to work like a clock, right? I mean, that's great. So where do you put responsibility then? Well, actually, responsibility is, in the way I see it, is a social concept. And the way to think about it is if you're the only person on earth, right? The idea of personal responsibility has no meaning. Who are you being responsible to, right? Enter the second person. Now, wait a minute. Now there's two of us here. Okay, we're going to have to set some rules up here for how we're going to behave with respect to each other because there's only one piece of pie over here and there's two of us. And how are we going to work this out, etc. So responsibility is you have to be responsible to the social group, and those are rules. And whatever your brain state is, whatever your neurologic state is, you can learn rules. Most of your life, whoever you are, you're responding to rules. Do this, stop at the red light, don't stop at the red light, do this, you don't do that. And you're following all those rules. You can follow, well, here's another rule you're supposed to follow, and you're not following it. So guess what? We're going to take you out of the grid here. And you don't have to think about it in another sense than that you broke the rules of the game. And there's got to be accountability. There is, if a node goes down in a computer program, it becomes somehow not functioning, boom, get it out of the network. We can't have that. So I just think there's a lot of confused thinking about what we're really talking about on these issues.
Mike, around this time, you also started to get interested in the concept of uniqueness. Not only are human brains unique, but is the uniqueness of human brains what makes humans unique? I wonder if you could explain both how you got interested in these ideas and what some of your conclusions are.
Well, there was a hunt for what is it in human brain organization that might not appear in the neuroscience, neurophysiology we understand of all animals. I mean, here we have this big, incredible thing called a human being and all the incredible things it does. Does it process information in a way that may be unique and underlie a lot of our incredible abstracting abilities, language abilities, and all the rest of it? And there have been, and of course, the deep assumption of neuroscience is, well, we're all made of neurons, and neurons are neurons, and we can study squid and flies and rats and everything else. And those studies will inform and can be used to model, well, how it must work in the human. So some people say, well, maybe there's a different neurophysiology associated with human cells. Maybe they're doing things that are different. And very few people have really gotten into that. One of them whose work I started to talk about a little bit was the very famous neurophysiologist Gordon Shepherd from Yale. He started reporting where he would get human cells from epileptic surgery that had to be excised from surgery and grow them, and then see if they responded in the same way as other neurons that he had studied from other animals. And he found some differences late in his life about it, and so it was trying to pursue that idea. Are there going to be just differences in the way the underlying hardware works that we have to be alerted to for our models and our understanding about humans? So that's one level. And then people look for different ways. Are there different cortical features in particular parts of the brain of the human that you don't see in primate relatives? And there have been various discoveries, claims along that route as well. So these are all just trying to look for, are there anything different that just would really enlighten us on how the brain may be processing new information versus other animals. And I would say it's a young enterprise, and we haven't quite gotten our hands on it, but it was motivated by just I wrote a book called Human,
Mm-hmm.
and I, I just said since we lost why we're doing it, we lost that yeah, we're pretty clever, man. I mean, we're doing all kinds of things we can't figure out, and so maybe we should just take an assessment of that. So then you're off the races. Then you get people who've come in and studied. Uh, do all animals have a theory of mind? Would that be a theory of mind, meaning that I must have some theory about you if I'm trying to anticipate the intentions you have to act on me? And so that's the idea of theory of mind. It was an idea originally discovered by the psychologist or thought through and thought up by the psychologist David Premack. And that now has become a huge field in cognitive neuroscience. All kinds of people are studying which brain mechanisms seem to be involved in when you're thinking about others versus the self. And it gave a whole new framework to think about how the human brain may be organized around a lot of social concepts, and just instead of just plain old how we calculate, how we speak, and the sort of standard cognitive science questions. How do we respond in a social setting? So it's a big deal. Lots of fascinating work going on in that area as well too.
It seems like the easier question, the more tractable question that you alluded to is just anatomically and physiologically. Are you convinced that the human brain is different than our primate relatives, or not necessarily?
Oh, there's tremendous commonality, of course. The last couple months ago, the time flies here, Lichtman at Harvard published this paper that received a lot of attention, as it should have. He's worked out the number of connections, and get this, 1 cubic millimeter, okay? 1 cubic millimeter of a human brain. It has something like 50,000 cells and 150 million synapses in 1 cubic millimeter. And he wants to know every one of them. And then you get done with that. Well, you got a few more 1 cubic millimeters to figure out here. It's stupefying, and yet that's the complexity of the system. So to start looking for differences doesn't seem to me it seems to me to be a logical thing to do. But first you got to establish the baselines, and you got to establish what is routine and so forth. So long way to go on that one.
So that was a bit of a non-answer. It seems like for you the more interesting one is not the physiological, the anatomical, but the responses, the things that make us different that you can measure in terms of behavior, perhaps.
Oh, for sure. Now that sure behavior is what we have. Yeah.
Mike, tell me about the question of so-called cognitive enhancing drugs. Firstly, do you think that they exist? Is there a pill that you can take that enhances your cognition, and what does that even mean?
Well, this came up in the Bioethics Council. Let me tell you, that was a big issue. New troops, they're called, NOOTROP. And the sense at the time, this goes back 2005, 4, 3, around there. And then later on, followed up a few years later, the sense was that it was oversold, that we didn't know yet about a pill you could pop and all of a sudden you could understand quantum mechanics. I'm not sure that pill exists ever. Maybe Richard Feynman. So, but of course, this is of intense interest, public interest, because of Alzheimer's and other diseases. Of when you start experiencing diminished cognition, is there something I could take to reverse this? Okay. Or the kid that wants to get a higher score on the SAT, to kind of pop this pill and my light burns brighter during the test. All those kinds of things. They were all at the time discovered just to be kind of attention focusing things and nothing infusing the circuits to make them process information better uh, at the time. Now, whether there are new claims, you know, I'm not up on that. But I think if there were, I'd know about them. So my guess is they still don't exist. They work around the edges. They help with maybe helping you focus your attention, maybe keeping you more alert, awake. Uh, if you are the distractible type, maybe focus on the question. Think just get you to do the damn task, right? And be there present through the and sustain your working system on it, and the time it takes to solve the problem. I think it's that kind of stuff, not enhancing the computational power of problem solving per se.
By that, do you mean, for example, if it's well established that a drug like Adderall can help people focus, is
Yeah,
that not necessarily the same as cognitive enhancement where there's a
yeah,
pill that would make you quote unquote smarter?
yeah, yeah. So I mean, I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth here. If you have an Adderall and it helps you to focus, and we get more out of you, it makes you smarter, right? I mean, but it actually didn't make you smarter. You were as smart before, but you were just all over the map. So it's putting constraints on your normal analytical abilities to get you to do the job. I mean, how I see it. It's not making you smarter. Uh, it's constraining your lack of interest in solving the problem at hand by making you focus on the issue and then using what innate abilities you have to solve the problem. Does that make sense to you?
It does, yeah.
It's a it's the way to look at it. From the behavioral point of view, you don't know any of that blah blah blah. And this group, you're studying this group who took Adderall and this group who didn't. You're going to see probably higher grades over here because they took Adderall. Yeah.
Mike, some of your retrospective writings, some of your autobiographical writings, you use the phrase or the term two brains. Is that meaningfully distinct from split brains?
I didn't hear that. I used the term what?
Two brains as opposed to split
Oh,
brain. I
yeah, yeah,
wonder
yeah.
what the distinction, if there is one, would be.
Yeah, no, and it was basically saying the same thing with another phraseology. Yeah, it wasn't anything different than what was always meant by split brain.
Is there something even provocatively to think about split brain as to some degree not thinking we shouldn't think about the brain in unitary terms, that it is to one degree or another two brains?
Uh, I, uh, I always say that the split brain results enable us to to consider the question that there can be lots of local processing units solving problems that aren't beknownst to other processing units in the brain. It allowed us to entertain that concept. And the reason we thought we could do that was because the split brain was so robust a phenomenon that we know what one side was working on and solving and how far down some cognitive path they were, and we knew the other side didn't know anything about it. So okay, so now that in that sense, the research on split brains is just a tool to get at that question. And so it enables people to realize there can be all kinds of parallel distributed systems going on in the brain where one part doesn't know what the other one's doing, but somehow it gets pulled together into an overall coherence. And split brain research, I think, really emboldens that idea because we can demonstrate it for you. That's just the way it is. You see a split brain patient tested, it's flabbergasting when you're in the room. You just don't believe it. Wait a minute. The left hand actually doesn't know that the right hand's holding an apple. What? How can that be? And all from the simple little tests like that to very complex ones, that just is to this day it kind of makes you sweat to see that coming out of this person and extremely well, and they seemed utterly normal in every other way, but except for when you ask the question in the way that the split brain researchers know how to do it. You see that there's this total separation of information, and you show that truth.
Mike, in 2011, your book, Who's in Charge? Free Will and the Science of the Brain. By necessity, did you have to become something of a philosopher to take on this topic?
Oh, yeah. Oh, boy. It was I must say I was aided by a friend of mine, colleague, a philosopher, Walter Sennett Armstrong, who's now at Duke. He helped me tremendously. Yes, I was asked to give the Gifford lectures in Edinburgh, and they are a well-established set of lectures, usually for philosophers, but many psychologists and people interested in the mind and its relationship to deep questions of religion and all the rest of it. And I was on the when I was on the bioethics council, that group of 18 people. They all instantly knew the Gifford lectures. It was interesting, whether they were lawyers or doctors or theologians or whatever. And so when the invitation came to me to do it, I felt flattered, of course, and all that. But I basically took 2 years of my life to prepare 6 lectures because I knew it was serious stuff. And this was going to be a wide-ranging audience, and it was indeed. And it was probably 2 of the most intense weeks of my life. You give 3 lectures a week to the large crowds on topics that they want an in-depth, report on, and how neuropsychology, how cognitive neuroscience would discuss these kinds of things, and they wanted it to grow out of the split brain work. So, yeah, it was a time to learn a lot of philosophy and to bring it into the experimental science story.
Did you come into this project with well-formed ideas about whether free will exists?
From what college bowl sessions to the present, that question pops up in various states of mental alertness. And so in some general sense, but that certainly focused the mind, that having a coherency through 6 lectures, winding up on the free will question. Yeah, that certainly was my moment to tell my story.
How did your views on the topic change as a result of the book?
Possibly I think it just gave an opportunity to think it through. You just would be kind of prior to that you would say you're an experimental scientist, you go give her a talk, you tell them what you did, you show them the stuff, and you say, here's what I think it means, and you go home. And in this kind of assignment, they want you to plug it into these larger questions of philosophy that people have thought about for hundreds of years, right? So it's a different balance, a different kind of exhaustion occurs. Uh, but yes, I think it brought order to my thoughts to be under that kind of gun. Yeah.
What special influence, split brain research and the left hand not knowing what the right hand is doing, what special insight does the split brain have specifically on the question of free will? In other words, if one part of our brain is unaware of the other part of our brain, doesn't that to some degree blow up the idea that free will is a singular entity? Can it not be multiple entities?
Yeah. So how does it work? How does the brain work? You're asking. Oh, I didn't tell you that part.
That's right. You were getting there.
No, you're asking all the right questions. Of course, the split brain story, just to remind everybody, is saying, guess what? We can carry out a surgical procedure to help this person with epilepsy. And basically, you have two separated conscious systems, each capable of doing their own thing outside the realm of awareness of the other. Whoa, you said, what'd you just say? And then you say it again. And so, yes, if that's true, then there can be two systems all within one cranium with two different goals and in conflict. And who wins that battle? Who is responsible? Well, so then you got to start doing a bunch of experiments to try to sort that out, which we've done over the years. And you certainly come away with the view that there are two different willful systems in the brain that can be working in concert or in conflict. Okay. So now as did I tell you this when the psychologist George Miller, I was visiting him at Rockefeller one day, and in the elevator walks William Estes, this famous psychologist in America. And George introduces him to me and so forth. And George says, Bill, Mike's the guy that does the split brain research. And his quip back to me was, great. Now we have two things we don't understand. Door open and he leaves and I'm saying, so it's kind of true. So and of course, I'm even pushing it further that there are gazillion little operating systems in the brain that are making decisions that we're totally unaware of. I mean, let's face it, 99, probably 0.9% of the stuff that's going on in your brain and my brain, we're not aware of. It's outside of consciousness. And yet it's working, doing all this stuff all the time. And so how do you supposed to be consciously responsible for that? Well, we're just thinking about this in an awkward way. I don't think that help. Anyway, but that's my story.
If there are aspects of your writings on this topic that naturally lead to the conclusion that free will, or at least part of free will, is illusory, it's an illusion, I'm curious if you've ever engaged with, religious organizations who must insist that free will is real. It can't be an illusion, based on the idea that, on what other basis would God judge us?
Yeah. Yep, that's the idea. All right. But think of it this way. Let's say you're as automatic as I maintain you are. You are a decision-making unit. That's what you are. What are we doing all day long? Making decisions. That's what we do. What do we do all day long? We acquire information. we put it into our view of the world, right? We want to get smarter about stuff. Everybody from the ditch digger to the professor, we're trying to gather information to make the best decision about an upcoming thing, right? And so, fine. Your responsibility is to acquire information to make a good decision based on a set of rules that you've bought into. And we're going to hold you responsible to that because we have a social group here that wants to keep these norms. So you view it like that, the kind of question, the way you ask it, it just doesn't mean anything to me. We are decision-making devices that try to make decisions based on the information we've gathered in our life. And if I make one of those that harms another person, I am probably breaking a social rule that I've learned in that process of learning about the world. And I have to be held accountable, just like we would hold a wayward machine responsible. Get that machine out of here, it's screwing things up. So I think these talks of free will and the religious connection, I just think it's not framed correctly. And I did have the about 10 years ago now, 8 years ago, anyway, somewhere around there, there was a meeting held at the Vatican, the Pontifical Academy of Sciences, right? And I was included on it, and these kinds of questions came up, and various people there with different points of view. And the Vatican has this hands-off thing called their Pontifical Academy. And while it's run by the church, supported by the church, it's independent of the church, even though there's this obviously philosophical view that they behold. But they want all comers to come and discuss. And so we all went, a bunch of us, there must have been 10 or 15 of us at the meeting. And the funny story I tell at the end of all this, the occasion occurs where you get to meet the Pope. And it was Pope Benedict at the time. So we're all there, and you go up and you're wondering what on earth you're going to say to the Pope, or what is the Pope going to say to you? And so you go up and it's your turn, and you stick out your hand and shake the hand of the Pope. And he looks me right in the eye, and he says, "Keep up the good work." Wow, this is really something. And then I like to tell the story. A month later, he resigned. But you know, the way we like to think these stories unfold and the characters behind them and their limited view of the world. Of course, when you're actually in the room with them, if they're normal people, they have a light touch about it all, and can be perfectly comfortable with having people around who don't buy their story, and as you try to tell them your story, you know, it's just a human relation. I remember when Sperry went to Pontifical Academy, he went around 64, and I was a student at the time. He came back, and he too was completely impressed with the experience, because it's so high level in one sense and so unexpected in another. You're just sitting there in awe of the history of the whole thing, kind of, and your small role in it, you know.
Mike, was thinking about free will sort of a gateway to thinking about consciousness for you?
No. The notion of personal responsibility is everywhere. There's there's, for instance, it came up in the law project, came up in the bioethics council, it came up all the time, and you just so people started doing experiments about how do people behave if they believe there's free will versus don't believe there's free will, and how do they behave in all kinds of tasks. And all kinds of experiments showed, well, people behave more responsibly if they believe they're basically told there's free will, versus another group randomly, pick that isn't told that. So the social value of the concept, regardless if it's true or not, is obviously there. It has a positive effect on people acting more responsibly. So therefore, people are highly motivated to say, well, is it actually true, versus this way of just say it's true and think it. So it turns out it's true. Things are better if you just say it's true. So let's see if it's actually true, so we can tell everybody. That kind of puzzle. And it's just going to be around for as long as we don't have some definitive epiphany on how to think about it.
Consciousness is something that the quest to find it has been around as long as humans have been around. What
Right.
are the unique perspectives of split brain research to identify what exactly consciousness is?
Yeah. Um, so this is gets to the core of what I've got to resolve in the book. But for me, at this point, there is whatever it is, you can have two of them. Whatever it is, if certain fibers are not severed, you seem to only have one of them. Well, what does that mean? Well, what that means is both hemispheres of the brain can manage and generate whatever it is on its own. Well, what does that mean? Well, maybe it gets even more selective. Whatever it is being managed throughout the brain in all these specialized systems we know each half brain has. Well, what does that mean? Well, if you look at the brain as a vastly parallel distributed system with all kinds of skills, each one of them has the ability to generate the feeling of being self-aware about the skill. So you can say, well, say that more specifically. So consciousness is the feelings about specialized capacities. Okay. Well, that may mean it's all over the place in the brain, or little local circuits have the ability to generate that. And what consciousness, as you and I experience it through time, moment to moment, is whatever thing is up in our brain, allowing for the actions or speaking or thinking that we're doing, has its own system to give you that sensation. And it's through time that the consciousness that we come to think of is actually happening. So that would argue for the kind of thing that in an instant of time, there's no consciousness. It's only through time that you get it. And whatever the mechanisms are that produce that thing are all over the place in the brain. So that's what my chore is, a task is to try to bring what I'm kind of trying to stumble through there as uh, more of a put more neuroscience hardware on it than I currently have or am able to.
And the
I'll
way
leave it.
that, in the way that you modify consciousness with the book, The Consciousness Instinct, what does that mean exactly? Is it that consciousness is instinctive, or there's an instinct to think that we have consciousness?
No, it's more the former that there are all these networks in the brain that are capable or are doing all kinds of things. I use as an example in that uh, what you're suggesting there in the book, recent findings that show that there's something like uh, I forget 28 or something like this circuits in the Drosophila brain, and all you need to do to think of the array of behaviors a fly can come up with is play those in various orders and in sequences, and you'll have plenty there to work with all the things a fly can do. So maybe there's something equivalent like that in our brain that is there, and you would call each of those circuits in Drosophila an instinct, a built-in circuit that allows a behavior as instinct is. So maybe we have those same kinds of circuits too, and each one of them would be an instinct. And as often is said, uh, we humans have vastly more instincts than an animal, not less. We think, oh, we're liberated from that. No, 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 no. Probably there's a gazillion things that we have evolved and have in our brains that allow us to play this orchestra we call consciousness, and you would and they're instincts. So let's call that. Let's call it out. And so that's the idea I'm trying to play with there. And then it turns out you go back to William James. He had son of a bitch had said everything first, right? And he had a similar kind of notion. It turns out, and I refer to that in the book. Uh, it's much more fun to discover it that he had a similar notion after you had your thought than before. That's what Sperry always used to tell me. He says, don't read anybody before you do the experiment.
Right.
Just go do the experiment. Then you got to go read what everybody said.
Well, Mike, we've come up in the chronology, of course, sadly, when the pandemic hits. You've written about humans as being the party animals. And of course, COVID was a time of social isolation. I wonder personally for yourself and how you viewed its impact on society, if COVID and all of the forced social isolation made you rethink things about either split brain research or consciousness or free will.
Um, you know, the quick answer is no. But we were able during COVID to live a ridiculously normal life because we kind of live up on a piece of property that allows us to be isolated. And so, in some sense, our day-to-day life wasn't that changed. And the isolation and then with Zoom, you could call in your job and everything else. So the biggest thing about COVID that impacted us, and I think everybody else too, is this kind of black hole of memory, that you can't remember the order of things. When did that happen? Wait, was that pre-COVID? Wait, did that happen during COVID? And all these reference points that we normally have are gone because you're not moving around in the culture with signposts to help you with your memories. To give a concrete example of that, in the medical school business, a big part of medical training is for people to go on rounds with the professor, right? For the interns and the residents to go around each morning, see the patients in the bed, walk around. And and I asked one of the neurologists when I used to be at Cornell about this. I said, why don't you just have one room, everybody comes in, sits down, and you roll the patients in? Why this thing? And the point was made that, well, the memory for the cases stinks when you do that. And so I took that metaphor to kind of like Zoom, you're sitting and everything's the same, the same place, same this, same, it's just another person talking. How can you possibly remember it all? And of course, the fact is we don't remember. Our memory stinks through a lot of it. And so those kinds of effects are certainly one becomes cognizant of and are annoying. And I bet you if, I don't know, maybe your memory is a hell of a lot better than mine, but I bet you if we tested you, you would find things during this last 4 or 5 years that, wait a minute, when did I do that?
That's right. It seems like a blur.
Seems like a blur. So other than those things, I don't have anything specific with respect to the split brain story.
Did the pandemic influence the timing of your retirement, or that was sort of already on a separate track?
Yeah, that's it was a mixture of I should retire, a mixture of because there's other people in the pipeline here who should take the resources that I was managing and let's see what they can do. Real strong feeling about that, actually. Move over. There's all these bright people behind you, and so that was a big part of it. And then, the aging thing rears its ugly head. You're on you don't have the total energy you used to have and all that kind of stuff. So you just want to take it a little slower. So,
that brings the story right to the present. To the extent you're capable of or willing to share, tell me about this new book project you're working on.
Well, I've been working on it now for a couple years, and I've written a chapter and a kind of the pitch for the book. Still not happy with it. I'm trying to get the tone right. There's all my books are generally written for the general reader. I just don't see any reason not to do it that way, or maybe I can't do it that way. I'm not that kind of writer, but this one I'm really kind of puzzling how light it can be while making the serious points I want to make versus how do I have to tighten it up and then just where I want it to go at the end. Turns out so I've been asking a lot of people who people I respect, whose books I like and so forth. And there's at least two kinds of people, I can tell you that. One type, they do not know where the book's going to land when they start it. And two, then the other type, oh yeah, they know. They've outlined the whole thing. And the latter are principally, I think, more professional writers. They got an assignment. They're going to tell the story. They know how to tell a story. They have the skill. And that's the way it is. And then the other people, some of them are better writers than others. Some of them are great writers. But they can't quite see yet where it's going to land. And they work it through as they're writing. And I'm more of the latter category for whatever it's worth than the former category.
In retirement, do you still have mentor opportunities? Are you interacting with younger colleagues and students?
Constant requests for that. And it kind of hurts that you can't do that. Because so much comes from that. So many inspirations. Discovering that someone doesn't even know about something, and then you bring them along into it, and the joy of seeing the enlightenment and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, that's not good. I am still doing way too much editing so the for PNAS has this bottomless need to have editors set up for reviewing papers and getting that part of the scientific enterprise done. And you, you just gotta to get out of that. You just gotta show some spine and say, "All right, I'm done." You know, it's an endless request to help out, but I do have the time to do it, and you actually start having lots of theories about the nature of the scientific enterprise per se, and where it's coming from, and who's involved, and how is this actually going. And then you come also to the realization that there are plenty of, I mean, thank God, there are plenty of good citizens in science that take on the work more than they have to or should, more than they should. Not that they have to is their own individual barometer, but that they should, because they're busy too. I mean, they have their life. So I don't know. It's and then of course the status of American science is so high in the world that everybody wants to publish in the prestige American journals, and so we got just a ton of papers.
You're
So
keeping busy, it sounds like.
keeping busy, absolutely.
Well, Mike, for the last part of our talk, now that we've worked right up to the present, I want to ask a few retrospective questions, and then we'll end looking to the future. Let's start, of course, with what brought us together, Caltech, and of course, Roger Sperry. I wonder if you can just reflect on Sperry's legacy and his work specifically as a product of Caltech.
Yeah. So well, of course, his legacy is untouched. He as I wrote in my appreciation of him for science after he won a Nobel Prize, all of his students were saying, "Well, which thing did he win it for?" I didn't know yet. And because neurospecificity, the split brain stuff, his work on the first showing Gestalt visual theory was wrong, and so forth. Uh, so his legacy, and then in his later philosophical work, which I think is of note, later in his life after all of his famous work, uh, I I think Caltech uh, played a huge role in his uh, long-term the foundations of his legacy. He was, everybody was there. The faculty is just stupefying when you think about who was in the biology department, and people down the hallway, and all this kind of stuff. You know, you're playing tennis with all the best players. Your game's going to get better. And I think that is so true at Caltech. It's almost laughable. You got to be on your toes all the time. Uh, and and I think he made use of. I have memories of him walking down the central area there on his way to the Athenaeum for lunch with people. I have memories of him always disappearing for his swimming. He was very physically active because he said he had to because of his earlier bout with tuberculosis. Uh, and then I knew exactly when he was back in the lab because he always left his door a crack, and always welcoming him of long conversations. I talked to him all the time. Uh, I mean, that's just the personal side of it, but I, I mean, to me, Caltech had this incredible experience I had there, and I can just imagine it was more the same for him in spades. He was a he was he was a I don't know what the word is, not aloof, but distant. To He wasn't chatty guy. Just go in and start talking and, you know, what happened on the football game that weekend, that kind of stuff. None of that. Uh, and I think the Caltech professors had one thing they imbued you with at every corner, which is what you're working on important? That's that's the killer question. They'd listen to, you got some idea, maybe you're getting off on some tangent that you found, some rabbit hole, basically. And then you'd go present it at a lab meeting and there'd be that look. Yeah, that's a problem. You're doing an experiment on it, but is it important? And that kind of way of saying that with the flick of an eye or the grimace, it was always around. The eyes glaze over moment. So that was everywhere. I mean, Sperry had it, Van Herveld had it, Delbruck had it in spades. Oh boy, he was a tough one. Pauling had it, Strumwasser had it, Sturtevant had it. I mean, come on, these are experiences that are, are second to none. And then your fellow grad students and your fellow postdocs, they all, they're all in the moment too. And it's just, it was just serious stuff, but not without fun and humor, but just serious. You didn't screw around. That's what I'm saying.
Mike, pure speculation on your part, if I may. It's been 30 years since Sperry's passing. If we could bring him back and ask his perspective on the developments of the field, what do you think he would see as a very natural progression, and what do you think would take him by surprise?
Well, on the first one, the natural progression story, so there's technological developments going on all the time, right? And they can be quite intense. And you got to learn a lot of stuff to make this machine work, and a lot of new data analysis, right? And you can, take me as an example. I can walk into a lab here at Santa Barbara where all that's going on, and you go in and you sit down and all this stuff's going on, and you raise your hand, you can ask a question, and you can be right in tune with what the point is of the talk. And that's the point. The questions haven't changed that much. It's the technology that tries to illuminate them. So if they're illuminating the question, and you can key into a modern conversation about whatever it is they're presenting, because you know what the question is. Because we're still trying to answer these big questions, even though there's new technology. So what I'm saying is there's a continuation in this field where the questions are much larger than right now our capacity to answer them in a concrete, in a specific, way. What would he be surprised by? Wow. Well, I mean, maybe, things that come to mind, of course, are all the things that are happening in AI. That was just a joke, 30 years ago? It was a joke 10 years ago. And now everybody's just puzzling it. What does this mean? I just heard a talk last Friday that's just stunning in an aspect of what we can learn from artificial neural networks that mimic human phenomenon of emergence, and it just stops you in your tracks when you hear these talks. Where it's all going to land or sort out, we're in the middle of it. I don't know, but certainly, jumping ahead to the same things I'm stunned about and the field is stunned about would certainly be there. there was just no imagining this 30 years ago. So, and now 10, maybe sci-fi 10 years ago had it down, but not the working day people.
Mike, the focus of our discussions has been, of course, on all of the discovery. Are there aspects of split brain research that feel as fresh or as unanswered or as much of a black box as when you first considered them way back in graduate school?
Yeah, sure. So we get to the subjective reality question, the you. That's what we all spend our time in all day long, is that subjective moment. And is that going to be what is it going to be? Is Dan Dennett going to win and say, well, when you just put all these calculations together, that just falls out of it, and there's no place in the brain where this happens. It's what the brain does, period. It's everything. It's everywhere. Not that you's everywhere. That's just it falls out of it. Or is there going to be a set of networks that can be spelled out, articulated, and if wired together, we can build one of these things? That's still the two sides of that question are just, no one knows, has the slightest idea actually how it'll work. So in that sense, when the split brain work becomes, to me, every bit as alive, because we can make two of these things now. What does that tell us? We can maybe even do more than that with other cuts. What does that tell us? And it's, I think, and I go back to my book idea. I think there's a point where when we say these things, all of a sudden, I like to say when the penny drops, you get it. You say, oh, that's what that means. Versus you can be saying concepts for years and years and years and years, and all of a sudden there's this epiphany. Oh, that's really what that means. It takes on a dimensionality to it, a fullness that we're not there yet on how to think about things like subjectivity. Okay, we can make two of them. Okay, we can maybe make more. What is that, though? How are we supposed to think about that? And that's what I'm trying to add some light to.
Mike, your career trajectory is the opposite of being hired as an assistant professor in one place and spending your entire career there.
Yeah.
What has been the effect or the impact or the net benefit of having moved around so often in your career? What's been the value to that, and where would you tend to de-emphasize the significance because the ideas travel with you?
Yeah. There's so many aspects of academic life that I don't find interesting. So moving from one point to another point gives you the opportunity to have fresh relationship, fresh issues, fresh this, fresh that. And so over the years, our moving around, it was always just something new and exciting, a new project, a new dimension to the job. When you do a piece of research and you've kind of defined the problem you're interested in, but when I left Caltech, the split brain thing and what it really means and its many implications, and then going to New York and after a bit finding a whole new group of patients to study that were varied and different, brought whole new different meaning to some of the split brain work, and then being asked to to do these extra scientific things like serve on bioethic councils and this law project you just mentioned and other things. All that is enriching, and Uh, they all came in different places and probably through different connections that I came across by moving. One thing by moving around, but one thing is the excitement of working in a medical school versus a arts and science department is
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
big change in my life and in my thinking. Spending 10 years at Cornell Medical School in New York was a big deal. You thought you understood the neurologic underpinnings of consciousness, then you just see this whole different story and lots of different ways it's damaged and all the rest of it. So I found moving around enriching, not otherwise. And and then I had the brains to, while that was all going on, holding on to my house in Santa Barbara, so I had a place to come back to. And here we are.
Mike, the
So,
duality of your intellectual output, directing graduate students, working in technical environments, writing scholarly papers, and then on the other hand, all of the books that you've written that are geared toward the broader audience. Do you generally view your impact the way that you've shared your ideas in those separate categories? Or is it really, at the end of the day, all about the production of knowledge for you?
yeah, um, it's also different. Each task has its constraints on it. Uh, but uh, I would think maybe you put your finger on it more in the latter category that you're contributing to knowledge, understanding. It's all for me. It's all based on the appreciation of the role of the brain in it all. I really hold on to that one, and you know the to not appreciate the fact that this all these things we're so agitated on as humans and in our culture are due to some circuits in your brain. Chill out. If you understand that, you want to manage it all, you want to be part of it all, but you realize the underlying the underpinnings of it all, and it brings a calmness to me about it all, and so it's that's what motivates all these extensions into other things. That's my stance on it. Everything from, I wrote a couple editorials for the New York Times on the embryo question, and I wrote a book on the ethical brain, all about this stuff. Come on, guys, get with the program here. This is what we know, and this is where it may start touching these interesting questions. But let's come talk about it. And so that, you think of some of today's politicians. Can you imagine having a discussion about neuroethics with them? No, forget about it. But that's the goal, quite a goal.
Mike, for the science, all that you've worked on, where do you think you've moved the needle the most?
Well, I think I mean, I think certainly the split brain human work was the big event that I was lucky upon to be part of very early on, and have held that close to what I think about all the time. And I don't know. It's I find myself. I think about. I think about the brain basis of things as they apply to all kinds of stuff all the time. That's just what I do, and that doesn't mean I don't have a whole lot of fun. I like to do a lot of other stuff too, but it's kind of what you do. That's what you were trained to do. That's what you want. And this, by the way, the idea of training uh, who you are. I think the who you are comes first, then the training. You have this impulse. There's something there you want. There's something in part of your personality trait or your view where you went after that, and then lots of people shaped you and contributed to it and all the rest of it. But I don't think you take a person interested in uh, rocks and turn them into interested in a dynamic brain. So they got two different things they're interested in. So that starts with an impulse that it comes it comes with you from the factory, and then you try to do something about it.
Well, finally, Mike, one last question looking to the future. Using your powers of extrapolation, given how long you've been at it, where is the field headed, and what are you most excited as you look to the up-and-coming generation and what they're doing?
Yeah. So I mentioned to you earlier that there's one idea I sort of got off the ground just as I was retiring, was to have these sessions where you would take kind of that question and bring people together to think about it. Have 4 or 5 people think about, how are we locked into current concepts? How are we not liberating ourselves by not mixing our ideas more fruitfully and often? I mentioned, I think this earlier, the famous statement by Wolfgang Köhler: the best science comes from trespassing. And people mixing ideas from other fields and liberating themselves and seeing things. Because it is a fact that if you're working on a scientific problem, you have to focus on it. It's hard, and it requires very specific, detailed, blah, blah, blah. There's no mystery as to why people get channeled and why frameworks start. There's no mystery at all why that happens. In some sense, it has to be part of it. But how can we have build into our institution regular rituals that liberated us from that? And I was thinking towards the end of my academic having a Friday afternoon session called The Pitch. And the pitch was, just stolen from Hollywood, right? You're pitching a new movie here. You got to come and tell us what's your new idea, and have it blow in the face of everything that's going on around you. And just as an exercise that was given mutual respect by everybody in the room, would go a long way for people just to, have a larger canvas to draw upon their future thinking. And yes, I am avoiding your future question because that's only a bum's game. No one ever gets it right. Something happens. Holy cow!
It's been interesting the whole time. It'll continue to be interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Don't worry about new things. I'll end on this note because it just came up. So, go back to the neuroscience and law thing. How much is neuroscience going to change in the courtroom and the legal system question? Well, big, bright, shiny new thing, neuroscience is going to solve everything kind of thing. Actually, I'll bet you in the next 10 years, the deeper question will be, how will AI challenge the legal system? There's going to be large language models that make predictions about recidivism, about parole, about all these things that are probably better than any of our current experts and all the rest of it. And will that be allowed to happen in the courtroom, and all the forces that will be against that, and so forth and so on? So I think there'll be changing questions that we can't quite yet imagine, but on that one, I'm pretty sure that's going to be a big one.
Mike, it's been a wonderful series of discussions. I'm so glad we were able to do this and to have you share all of your perspective and insight. I want to thank you so much.